Perfect. It's
Okay.
perfect. Yeah.
All right, great. We can turn that off.
Mm-mm-mm. It is started. Okay, fine.
Let's
Great. So we
see.
start.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lovely. Great. Hey everyone, welcome to Pleasure Principles, the podcast where we take an unapologetic deep dive into the messy, magical, and often misunderstood world of pleasure, sexuality, and the relationships. I'm your host Avik, and today we are shaking up the conversation around sex in a way that will leave you um, intrigued, informed, and maybe even like little squirmy in the
Mhm.
best way possible. Yes. So joining me today are the two absolute powerhouse in the world of sexual communication and the education, Tess and Kels. So welcome to the show.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you. Thank you for that
you.
warm welcome.
Yeah, I love
Lovely.
the messy and magical
Yeah.
combination. That's great. It's so right. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into this topic today, I'll quickly love to introduce you to Tess and Kels. So, dear listeners, Tess and Kels both are the co-founders of Squirm, Squirm, to be bit more specific. So, these they too have made it their mission to dismantle the stigma surrounding sex and help people navigate the tricky, vulnerable conversations with the humor and compassion and just the right amount of awkwardness. Their platform, Squirm, does this through the workshops, events, and their highly acclaimed podcast, Porn Nerds, a show which currently ranking in the top 10% of the podcasts and offering a fresh, nuanced take on porn's intersection with our sex lives. So, Tess and Kels, welcome to Pleasure Principles. I really have a feeling that this is going to be one of our most eye-opening episodes yet. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Lovely, lovely. So, um, I mean, to both of you, like, why do you think like talking about sex and especially the porn is such a taboo, even in the world where so much of our media is saturated with the sexual content, adult content? What's holding us back?
Great question.
Mhm.
You want I mean, I think you make a very important point, which is it's not like we're not encountering sex very often,
Mm.
right? We see sex everywhere. Movies, music videos, advertising, it's news, like it's everywhere, but it's offered to us in such a sort of surface level and
Yeah.
narrow, offering. And so I think what's holding us back, I think there's a lot of reasons why we're only still usually engaging with sex in this sort of surface level
Mm.
way. I think a lot of it has to do with, at least in the United States, this sort of background of religion and purity culture that like really still informs so much of how we live our lives, even if fewer and fewer people and younger generations are subscribing to these really rigid ideas around religion. I think it still permeates our culture in a way that's palpable and like very, very strong. So I think that's one reason.
Mm.
I think another reason is people don't have a ton of practice. So
Mm. True.
maybe you're coming to this conversation from a place of an open mind and not the sort of religious baggage that a lot of people come to this conversation with. But even with that open mind and that desire to have more open conversation, it's like, where do you start if you haven't had that role modeled for you in a way? If like
Yeah.
the majority of your encounters with sex have been rom-coms or porn or music videos or like ads selling
Mm.
Carl's Jr. hamburgers, like
Yeah.
I think there's not a lot of practice. And so even if people really do want to go deeper and be more honest and messy and awkward and all of it, it's like, what do I even say though? How do I get there? It's kind of the path of least resistance is just to continue the more sort of surface level engagement with it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is like when we're younger and growing up and porn and sex is around us, it's
Mm.
kind of like no authority figures really want to touch it.
Yeah.
Like parents are like, not my problem, like can't, nope. And then like schools are like, "Ugh, we can't." So we're like, it's kind of this luck of the draw, and it ends up often being, I think, this really peer-to-peer thing.
Mm.
Um, and like with the surge, like the big surge of internet porn, I feel like that's where a lot of us have turned to learn about sex.
Mm.
And which is like a big reason why we decided to do this podcast about porn, because
Yeah.
it's like such a like formative educator for so many of us.
Exactly.
However, it's like simultaneously the butt of the joke to like watch porn. It's kind of regarded as this dirty thing in a lot of circles. And I think it's just like because of the stigma that's surrounding it for all of the
Mm.
reasons Tess just mentioned, of like our own kind of squeamishness around our sexuality, like a lot of the peer-to-peer conversations are pretty
Yeah.
limited. And so I think it's just kind of like this, it's like this uncle that we all have that we're all like really close to, that teaches us so much about our sexuality. Like no one's talking about it. Uncle is maybe the wrong term, but like it's like this figure in so many of our lives that like everyone's a
Oh,
little embarrassed about, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Lovely, lovely. Thanks for sharing this. And also, one more thing, when we're talking about taboo, do you think that taboo plays into the power of dynamics with the relationships, um, or even like how we approach the sexual communication with ourselves?
yeah. So does taboo sort of play into
Mm.
how we engage with sex and
Mm.
sexual dynamics? I think so. I mean, I think part of sex is experimentation and play and breaking up the norm of your, work
Mm.
day and your sort of productive life. It's like a way to experience different feelings. And
Yeah.
part of what's appealing about that, like I think the taboo piece is that you do get to like break up the monotony of what else is going on in your life, like
Mm.
raising a family or holding down a job or multiple jobs. It's like sex is a way to really escape that. And I think
Mm.
the taboo piece of it is that something that it offers a way to like kind of rebel against the rest of the day or the rest of the
Mm.
week, and kink is a
Yeah.
big part of that, being
Mm.
able to sort of rebel in your power dynamics and like take control when maybe you don't usually, or vice versa. The taboo of watching porn and feeling like you're doing something wrong, like that's a huge appeal. And I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to kind of push back against the dominant stories of like how we are quote unquote supposed to be, as adults, as productive
Yeah.
and upright citizen adults.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'll just say like that's such a great point about internalized shame, which because it's true that even the most confident among us, or maybe whosoever is listening right now, uh, can feel a little tongue-tied when it comes to saying that what we really want. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
let's build on that. So yeah, and I'll definitely come about your podcast, Porn Nerds, which takes such a refreshing approach to porn as a cultural phenomenon. That's, I mean, what inspired you to make uh, porn the focal point of these conversations? And also at the same time, if you can share like how has the response been from people who love it? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think like when we set out with Squirm, the mission has really
mm,
been sexual communication, like getting people to feel more comfortable about expressing
mm,
boundaries and desires and interests and all that.
mm,
And, you know, as like the mission evolved and we were kind of at this project market where we connected with a bunch of producers, it just became increasingly clear that it's like very hard to have a conversation about sex without having a conversation about porn because it
Hmm.
is such a prolific part of our own education. And
Yeah.
Tess has like a big formal academic background in it that she can touch on
Hmm.
herself. I won't do it justice, but I think yes, it's like it feels completely inextricable from like so many people's sexual identities. And I
Hmm.
think we really looked at the show as like a conversation with the listener. Like so much of it is built on people's anecdotal experiences with how it's formed them and their sexualities and their relationships. And so it's kind of just this, I don't know, it was like a very cool little
Hmm.
time capsule of
Okay.
hearing, like having this conversation with everybody around how this influences us.
Yeah, I think we wanted to bring porn to the conversation of Squirm or the world of Squirm in a way that we hadn't really seen it being talked about before. Like there are certainly podcasts about porn focused on what's happening in the industry
Hmm.
or focused on, more like from a sex therapist lens of quote unquote like addiction or stress around porn. There's a porn review podcast that's really fun. Like that's definitely out in the open, but we wanted to take it to a real personal place,
Hmm.
knowing that we have this squirm community of people who are vulnerable about their sex lives and practicing talking openly about it. We're like, okay, let's involve this amazing community of people who have so much to say about their own experiences, but let's also bring in that insider industry knowledge. Like we'll bring in people who work in the industry, performers, directors. We bring in a journalist for the Financial Times who writes about the business of porn. And we do talk to a sex therapist. So we kind of try to bring in all these different angles. So it's not
Hmm.
like this is what we think you should think about porn, or this is not what we're saying you should decide about porn. It's
Yeah.
like, here are so many different ways we can talk about this massive topic,
Hmm.
and we're going to do it from a real close personal lens. And we're also going to do it from this 300-foot view. Look at this
Hmm.
crazy huge industry. Just look at the numbers. Like, it's staggering. And we're going to bring in a bunch of humor because, like, porn is also, there's so much comedy in porn. Like we
Yeah.
have this whole section on porn parodies,
Hmm.
like pornographic videos that are based on our favorite video games or cartoons. Like just like there's so
Yeah.
much levity and humor in the industry as well. And I think that gets overshadowed by a lot of the fears around what it's doing to our brains and our relationships. So like she said, it was this really fun sort of time capsule of
Hmm.
like what people are thinking right now, both inside and outside the industry, how we feel about it as just two people who are sexual, and just trying to like yeah, bring people in like a nuanced way and let
Hmm.
people decide for themselves how they feel
Yeah.
about it in the end.
Lovely. I really love the, I mean, that your work thrives on the nuances. Like it's not about like taking sides, but actually opening up for a space for the curiosity or the exploration. So, uh, but one more thing, like I mean, if you can share, like uh, from the responses, like what's been the most surprising or maybe the unexpected feedback you have received so far? I mean, one or two if you can share.
Yeah.
Uh,
What do you think?
I mean, I think this isn't the most unexpected, but I would say like
Yeah.
some of my favorite stuff to
Uh-huh.
hear is just a lot of like this has been really validating and feeling good. Like the kind of core concept of the show is this
Mm.
central conflict of a lot of people are watching a lot of porn and they're like feeling really guilty about it, you know?
Yeah.
And I've spoken with a lot of just like my friends who have been like, I'm really trying to get off porn. Like there's this real kind of aversion to the
Uh,
behavior. And so I think some of my favorite feedback is like, now I just like am able to look at this a little bit differently and like
mm,
see how I can engage with it in a healthy way. I feel like we've had some people say that it's like opening the door to have conversations with their kids about porn,
Yeah,
which,
that's what sticks
mm,
in my mind the most.
yeah, it's like very exciting and important to do that, I think, because it is like especially, I mean, gosh, where there's like the whole universe of any sexual kink is in your pocket at like
Mm.
basically any time if you have a
Yeah.
phone. And so I think it's like very touching to think about the people who like this is like spurred conversations or they've like shared it with their kids to be able to listen to it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
didn't make it for like an adolescent audience intentionally,
Mm.
but it does have the sort of porn literacy piece, which is like deconstructing these ideas around porn and the messages we receive, looking at it in like this grand scheme of our history as like a sex culture and also like the evolution of porn and how we got here and how watching porn now is so different from watching porn in the 90s, for example. So like there is this educational component to it, and we absolutely want younger generations to feel empowered to make their own decisions and to feel like if they choose to watch porn, they can enjoy it without it making them feel insecure or making them feel like they're not doing something right. And so to hear parents say, "Oh yeah, like this gave me the push and the
Yeah.
language to talk to my teenager about porn for the first time." Like that's huge. That's like yeah, it's kind of
Mm.
hard to compare that feeling when you hear that. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, at least somebody's having these conversations and we're doing something to help, you know?
Exactly. Lovely. Yeah. One more thing, like so I was reading your bio, and from there, this word squirmy moment from your workshops. Uh, so I mean, to understand better, like when you're unsure, like how to check in with a partner during the intimacy. So on this, what advice do you give to people who feel paralyzed by the fear of ruining the mood?
Hmm.
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 It's a really good question.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that starts when it's close on, like
Mm.
before you're in a sexual encounter and like want them to touch in a different spot or
Mm.
whatever. I think like creating a culture where there is within the relationship where there's just like this idea that feedback is a gift and that
Yeah.
it's not a criticism and that you have this shared goal of pleasure and exploration and expansion. I feel like, yes, like establishing that before any direct feedback just kind of creates this blanket that you're both able to go into. Yeah, I think that because it's often very stigmatized to talk about sex, and we
Mm.
are saturated in this culture where there's so much like hypersexualization all over the place, but we're not really having like a lot of direct education. So everyone just like
Mm.
feels like they should be really good at it out the gates. Like I think there's like a lot of fronting that can happen. And
Mm.
so
So much pressure.
yes, like you don't expect to hop into a car and drive perfectly the first time, right? Like there's like an
Yeah.
understanding that you're going to develop these things. So yeah, I think a lot of it just like comes down to having kind of this like culture of like we're on the same team. This is a never-ending practice, like beginner's mindset kind of thing. And if we want to try something, like let's do that together. Because that humility really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you're like that, that's definitely best case is you kind of
Mm.
start with your clothes on by like building this sense of safety and play and feedback as a gift. And if you're in the encounter and you're like feeling kind of paralyzed, you're like, I don't really love what's happening. I don't really know what to say. I
Mm.
don't want to make them feel bad. I don't want to ruin the moment. You know, one of the like foundations of Squirm is trying to
Yeah.
debunk this idea that talking about sex is going to ruin sex or like talking about it's going to ruin the moment. So like that whole idea is like really central to what we're trying to
Mm.
help people with. Um, I think it's important to know that like speaking up is okay. And on the flip side, you need to also be a good listener yourself,
Mm.
right? Like it takes two people to be able to work with feedback. There's someone who needs to share it, and there's someone who needs to be able to receive that feedback too. So
True.
that does start with like creating the safe space outside of sex. But if you're in the moment, I think like remembering that there's nothing wrong with wanting to redirect or pivot. So like just
Mm.
put aside the feeling like something wrong is happening. It's like all very natural that it's going to ebb and flow and that you might want to change course halfway through, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I think also there's this feeling like maybe because of how you see it in movies and porn, it's a very linear experience. That
Mm.
sex is like you do this, then this, then this, then this, and then orgasm, then done, and like perfect every time, you know. But
Yeah.
it can like amp up, it can scale back, you can fully stop and just like lay next to each other for a little bit. So I think if you're really not sure what to say and you're not into what's happening and you don't have the words to ask for exactly what you want, you can be like, this is feeling really good, but I just want to like kiss for a minute or just like cuddle or like like let's just like scale back. I'm like feeling really sensitive. Like you can kind of just pump the brakes and maybe that'll give you some time to figure out what does feel good instead, rather than needing to come up with like the perfect solution in that moment of a different position or like a different way you're being touched. I kind of feel like just pumping the brakes in like a sweet way can relieve that pressure to then like find those words again. And if it's a
That's
little
yeah.
awkward, it's like that's okay. I think people can get more comfortable with moments of awkwardness and then recovering from it and not having it be like sex was ruined because there was a moment where someone was like, I'm not sure where to put my hands, you know? Like I think that's like kind
Yeah.
of just part of being a person and getting naked
Mm.
with another person or
Yeah.
a few.
True, definitely, yeah, and in this context also, we often hear from people like, yeah, I'm the great communicator and all, but maybe somehow I'm not tuned into with my partner. So, I mean, this kind of belief some people have. So, how do you help them to bridge that gap?
I'm just gonna say, Kels, uh, I think you like helped me think about being attuned to people
Mm,
in sex, kind of like improv. Like people
yeah.
who are like really good at improv are really good at being attuned because you have to read the room really well. You have to
Mhm.
think,
Mm,
you have to anticipate a little bit of what's going to happen. You can't just fully be in your head. So I feel like like you brought that up to me early on, and I was like, man, we'd probably all be better at sex if we all took improv
Yeah.
classes.
mm.
It's not like a real answer, but it's just something I think about a lot in terms of
Okay.
like
Yeah.
being attuned to others and how that translates to the bedroom. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, like I think it comes back to that like listening
Mm,
and kind of yes and spirit, like I think a lot about so one of our workshops is voicing your sexual desires and it's all about like how do you get good at saying this
mm,
stuff. And I feel like 70% of the people that come in, the problem is like I don't actually know what I want to voice. Like, and a
yeah.
lot of sex becomes this kind of game of chicken of like, I don't know, like I like it if you're into it. Like I like it if you're into it. So like now what?
Who's gonna
And
say the thing that we're into though,
right. Yeah. And like,
Yeah.
what is that? And I
right?
I guess I feel like that from my perspective, a lot of the time, or like the partners that I've been with, where I feel like there's this like lack of attunement. A lot of it is like a lack of self knowledge or understanding of like
Mm,
what it is that they're seeking. And I don't think that I don't say that to pathologize it. I think that that's just very, very common.
mm,
And one of the most foundational things that we all are able to do to improve our sex lives is to like have the fun job of doing the homework of like what turns me on, like
yeah.
what is it that I'm going to communicate to my partner? Because I feel like that's usually a big part of the battle. Like
Mm,
there is the
mm,
challenge of actually getting the words out, but
exactly.
sometimes even harder just to identify like what those words are wrapped around and what you want to
Hmm.
try. So I think like yes, having this like sense of exploration and curiosity with your own sexual landscape and then that of a partner is kind of where it all
Mm,
starts.
Yeah, being able to really listen and go into sex without um this like play by play already in
mm,
mind of like, well, I'm gonna do this and they're gonna do this and just being able to like kind of take it one step at a time and be be checking in with the nonverbal cues as much as the verbal cues. Like I think that's a really big part of it. Like if you want to be a better listener during sex,
Mm.
like hear listen to the sound someone's making, but also like really tune into their body, like how are
Yeah.
they moving? Like how is it? It's such a sensory experience. And I think we all get in our heads so easily and think like, okay, well, this has been going on for a while, so I should probably like do it this way, or is this taking too long? And forget to actually pay attention to the real feedback we're getting in the moment. So out of our heads into the physical experience of what's happening,
Mm.
I think can help if you're like trying to kind of be a better sexual listener.
Exactly. So I believe open communication between both the couples or maybe in any relationship is very important to listen, to understand, and to feel. So definitely, yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
So, I know time is constrained. I really, I mean, really want to continue with the topics. So quickly, I mean, if you can share about the porn nerds, which you, I mean, it's a great thing or the idea of porn nerds. So, do you think that mainstream porn is uh, uh, failing us in terms of teaching people what healthy consensual sex looks like?
Really hard-hitting question right at the end there, aren't you? Curveballs. I mean, yeah, like I think my instinct on it is that it, it's like very much about context. I
Uh,
think that a lot of like we don't necessarily like look to Hollywood or whatever the mainstream movies are
hmm,
with this sense that they have some kind of moral obligation to teach
hmm,
us. Like we use the Fast and the Furious metaphor a lot. Like you don't go to Fast and the Furious and you're like, this is failing us in terms of showing us how to drive a
Driver's
car,
ed. Yeah.
Like
hmm,
so I think like a big because it's a stigmatized topic and because it has become this de facto sex ed, like there are definitely elements of like how people absorb that information that is
hmm,
problematic. And in the same breath, it's not necessarily like porn's job to teach us how to be good lovers.
hmm,
I think that it's all of our jobs as a society to be able to like put that in its right place, be able to enjoy this stuff as entertainment. Let's make sure that the industry is ethical and above board and that the performers are enjoying it and all that. Like that's a whole other part of the
Hmm.
conversation. But
hmm.
yeah, I think that I guess I don't think that it's like the industry's responsibility necessarily to teach us how to be sexual people.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's this movement
Hmm,
in the States to like the age verification laws, which requires, proving that you're over 18 and by putting in certain identifying
hmm,
markers, and it's like real controversial. And the whole idea is to like protect kids so that, to your question, like, is it harmful? Is it teaching us negative things and making us, I don't remember exactly how you phrased the question, but like,
yeah.
is it this harmful source or educating force?
Hmm,
And my response to the age verification laws and this censorship around porn is like, it's never going to go away. It's been part of our culture since the very beginning, like
yeah.
explicit imagery,
True.
erotic art, porn. It takes so many forms, but it's been around since the beginning. People have such a natural curiosity to see other people have sex. It's like a really beautiful trait that we're so curious about each other, and like sex is, it's so natural to be curious about it. So just like Kels was saying, like the context really matters. If you think
Hmm,
about porn as the main way people are learning about sex, then like rather than censor it, maybe we should just be better at teaching
hmm.
people about sex. Like
Yeah.
let
True.
porn exist, let people have fun with it and be curious, but like give them the actual education they need so that it doesn't become this like big scary thing in our lives. So it doesn't become the thing everyone's worried about.
Yeah.
There's ways to counteract that without needing to condemn porn itself.
Yeah, and I think it's like we'd be remiss to not mention, and this is a big part of
Mm,
the show too, but like that the packaging of this thing also changes it really dramatically.
yeah.
Like somebody seeking a visual aid to get them off when they're horny and just like want to masturbate, like that's kind of a different itch than when you're having sex with in a partner experience some of the
Mm,
time, you know? And I
yeah.
think like it's almost impossible to like not talk about porn in the way that it might be like distorting or
Mm,
however you want to word it, like how it's like changing our view of
true.
sexuality, like without talking about the internet and like our shrinking attention span in general and wanting to have like splashier things, keywords that grab, like a very like specific kind of brand of porn. I I think like a important value for us when making this is to like not minimize the fact that there are real harms that people are getting from like watching a lot of porn and this exposure. Like it does, there are those impacts.
Exactly. Exactly. I totally
However,
agree.
it's just like so much bigger than like the act. I think it's like it's detangling it from like our
Mm,
curiosity and sexuality in general. Like that is not something to pathologize. There's plenty of
true.
criticisms to be made about the whole all of it,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
I, yeah, it's like easy to round it up to this kind of like sex negative thing, which is what we're really
Mm,
trying to, I guess,
Yeah.
avoid, you know?
We like really
yeah.
wrestled with this a lot when making the show of
Mm,
just how to not pretend that there's nothing wrong with porn because like there are certainly plenty of things that are stressful and causing some harm like depending on, who you are and how you're consuming it and what it's how it's impacting your life. But so it's like we don't want to fully gloss over that at all and we're also not going to pretend like it's all bad. So it's like how do you find that middle ground? And I think one thing we landed on was like, is it a problem with porn or is it just a problem with the internet and smartphones and the fact that porn is so accessible and that it's really easy to feel like
mm,
we're not happy with our habits around our phones and most of porn, like
true.
85% is porn. Of porn is watched on your phone. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
part of this much bigger conversation about how we just interact on the internet with our digital devices and not with other humans and like
Mm,
she said trying to disentangle that the
yeah.
internet and smartphone piece from just the pornography component itself like porn that's
Exactly.
also Playboy that's also audio erotica like porn
Mm,
is so much more than just what's on your smartphone. So I think that's really important for us to get across. It's just like trying to put it in its context. Remember that the like delivery mechanism can feel like more of the problem than the content
mm,
itself.
exactly. I really love what you're doing at Squirm and helping people. That's most very important. And if I talk about from India perspective, so I guess you heard about Kama Sutra, right? Kama
Yeah.
Hmm.
Sutra. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it's the same thing. Like, it's the world's most oldest text, and I really love like what you are doing in your platform. It is definitely helping people in that context about understanding as a guide. So that's really commendable. So yeah.
Thank
Mm.
you.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Tess and Kels, for being here and sharing your incredible insights. And as I mentioned, you are breaking down the walls and building the bridges. So, that's really
Well,
great.
and
And
likewise, like thank you for what you're putting out there. I think
Yeah.
it's these are the kind of conversations that more of us need to have. So,
yeah,
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 like right
exactly.
back at you. Kudos for what you're
yeah.
doing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And for the listeners, I'll mention like make sure to check out Kels and Tess platform Squirm, Squirm, and their podcast for nerds. You can find it wherever you listen to the podcast, and trust me, it's a series that you do not want to miss. And if this conversation has sparked something in you, an idea, a question, or maybe even a squirmy moment, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend or someone whom you love the most. Start a conversation and keep exploring, because when it comes to pleasure, curiosity is always a good thing. So, uh, so until next
I love
time,
that.
stay curious, stay bold, and stay true to your pleasure principles. This is the host Avik signing off. Thank you so much.